your train that rolled down?
No.
Yes, sir.
No, RJ.
Yes, sir.
Holy. And it was secure, RJ, when I left.
Yeah.
She was insecure. How in the did that thing roll down, RJ?
I don't know. How many brakes did you put on?
The units, the DD and the first car, 7 brakes.
It was 1:14 a.m. when the ground began to tremble. A runaway train carrying 8 million litres of crude oil came thundering toward a sleeping town. But there was no one in the train, no driver, no hands on the controls. It had been parked hours earlier on a nearby hill, its brakes bleeding out. It derailed and hit the center of town at 100 kilometers per hour. The first explosion set the sky on fire. The second peeled buildings from their foundations. The third left 47 dead. By sunrise, the town had been obliterated. The town of Lac-Mégantic sat like a postcard, a quiet place in southeastern Quebec, Canada, near the US border. It rested beside a glimmering lake of the same name, wrapped in forested hills, with a railway line running straight through its heart. Trains had come through the town for over a century. By 2013, the trains weren't carrying lumber or grain anymore. They were carrying crude oil from North Dakota's Bakken Formation. Light, sweet, and highly flammable. Few towns along the line knew just how dangerous that cargo was. Even fewer knew that the tank cars used, DOT 111s, had long been criticized for their thin shells and tendency to rupture. The tracks ran straight through downtown, 20, sometimes 30 trains a week. But people were used to the sound and rattle. The Musi Cafe stood less than 50 meters from the rails. It was the town's heartbeat. On the evening of July 5th, 2013, the bar was packed. More than 80 people were inside, at least 30 more spilt out onto the patio. That Friday night, one of those trains, train MMA 002, weighing over 10,000 metric tons, was parked on a slope above town, leaking oil, just 10 kilometers away from the Musi Cafe. One man was in charge of it, and he was already asleep. Thomas Harding was a veteran railman, lanky, quiet, known for doing his job. He'd spent over a decade working the rails, most recently for a cost-cutting regional line called Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railway, MMA. On July 5th, 2013, he finished another long haul, from Farnham to a remote siding in the village of Nantes. It was one leg of a 1,600-kilometer route that delivered crude oil from the Bakken fields of North Dakota to Irving Oil's refinery in St. John, New Brunswick. He had driven this line dozens of times before. The train, known as MMA 002, was massive. 5 locomotives, a buffer car, and 72 DOT 111 tank cars, carrying about 8 million litres of crude oil. And Harding was the only person on the train, a standard cost-cutting measure that left safety in a single pair of hands. At around 11 p.m., he brought the train to a stop for the night in the siding spot, about 10 kilometers to the west of the town of Lac-Mégantic in the village of Nantes. The train was parked on a slope. To secure the train, Harding used 2 types of brakes. First, handbrakes. Harding applied 7 handbrakes, which he believed would hold the train in place, fewer than what the regulations required. But MMA's internal rules were murky. Harding believed he was following protocol. 2. Air brakes. These rely on air pressure supplied by the locomotive to keep the train still. Harding left the air brakes on by keeping the engine running. To check if the train was secure, Harding did a brake test. In this case, Harding was testing whether the handbrakes were strong enough to hold the train without the help of the air brakes. But he made a critical error. He left the air brakes on during the test. That meant the train appeared secure, even if the handbrakes weren't strong enough. Then he called a cab. As the cab driver picked up Harding in Nantes, he noticed black smoke and sparks coming from the front locomotive. He pointed it out, but Harding reassured him he had already called the rail traffic controller in Bangor, Maine, to report the lead locomotive had been having mechanical problems during the trip, and that thick black and white smoke was coming from its exhaust stack. He had been advised the smoke would clear on its own, agreed to deal with it the next morning, and was told to leave the locomotive running, a standard practice that left the air brakes engaged. What neither of them knew was that a piston was broken and leaking oil. Harding checked in for the night at the L'Auberge Inn in Lac-Mégantic. At 11:30 p.m., flames shot from the smokestack. A resident noticed the black plume. It was reported to MMA's rail traffic controller. Firefighters from Nantes arrived on site and shut off the engine, in keeping with railway instructions, to fight the blaze. They had no idea it was powering the air brakes on 72 loaded tankers. The MMA's rail traffic controller summoned a track maintenance foreman unfamiliar with the operation of railway air brakes to visit and check the locomotive. And by 12:13 a.m., 2 MMA track maintenance employees had arrived from Lac-Mégantic. They confirmed to the police officer and to the Farnham Rail traffic controller that the train was safe. It was not. Around this time, a call occurred between Harding and Richard Labrie, the operations manager on duty. He informed Harding that the locomotive had caught fire, but firefighters had already responded and put it out. Harding offered to go back and check on the train. Labrie told him not to worry.
Okay, is somebody up there to take care of it? Or?
Yeah, well, the firefighter were there.
Yes.
Harding didn't know the engine was now dead. He went back to sleep while the train, high on the hill, exhaled. Without pressure, the air brakes began to bleed out, slowly, silently. By 12:30 a.m., the tanks were no longer held by anything more than gravity. 8 million litres of flammable fuel, just waiting, and gravity never asked for permission. At 12:56 a.m., the train began to move. The brakes had bled dry. The train crept forward at first, unsure, 16 kilometers per hour, then faster, 50, 65, over 100 kilometers per hour, 10 times the safe speed for downtown Lac-Mégantic. It was a ghost train, lights off, horn silent. A firefighter, just returning from the earlier call at Nantes, saw it flash by. His headlights caught the streak of black. He instinctively knew the train didn't sound right. The train tore through the night, screeching as it flew off the tracks just after crossing Rue Frontenac, Lac-Mégantic's main street. Inside the Musée Café, no one knew what was charging towards them. There were still over 50 people inside the bar and on the terrace. And then, the air changed. A low vibration, more felt than heard. The glasses began to tremble. A sound like an earthquake, but from nowhere, and everywhere. A shape appeared in the dark. Then came 1:14 a.m. The train hit the curve near Rue Frontenac. It didn't make it. It was never meant to. The lead tankers derailed first, then the ones behind. The force folded them like an accordion, jackknifing steel into steel. Thin-walled DOT 111 cars tore open like soda cans. Within seconds, more than 1 million litres of crude oil burst loose. It sprayed across Rue Frontenac, through gravel, pavement, into storm drains, across sidewalks. Then, a spark caused an explosion. A fireball 200 feet high shot into the sky. It lit the lake, the hills, the windows of homes 80 kilometers away. The Musée Café didn't burn. It disappeared. There were at least 30 people inside. Most never had a chance. The heat reached over 1,000 degrees Celsius. hot enough to melt steel and vaporize flesh. A forensic expert would later say some victims were never found because there was nothing left to find. Some tried to run. They didn't make it to the door. In the seconds that followed, pressure waves blew out storefronts, shattering windows a block away. Fire erupted from the manholes as oil surged through underground sewers. A river of fire poured down the streets. Fire Chief Denis Lauzon, called in for what he thought was a small house fire, arrived to find what looked like the end of the world. He had to turn around. No route into downtown wasn't on fire. By 1:30 a.m., the Musée Café was just a crater. Thomas Harding was jolted awake by the sound of his train tearing the town apart. He had been asleep at the L'Auberge Inn, barely a kilometre from the blast. At 1:47 a.m., after being evacuated from his hotel, he spoke to Richard Labrie, the operations manager on duty, again. Harding described what he saw.
Flames, RJ, are 200 feet high. It's incredible. You can't believe it here. From the river right to the station.
What?
Flames, he said, were reaching 200 feet into the sky. Not long after, Labrie called him back.
It's your train that rolled down?
No.
Yes, sir.
No, RJ.
Yes, sir.
And it was secure, RJ, when I left.
Then, without waiting for orders, he headed toward the flames. He borrowed a firefighter's suit and slipped into the chaos. He found a small crew forming on the outskirts of the fire. 9 tankers, still intact, sat on the track behind the wreckage. If they ignited, the devastation would double. Together, they pulled the tankers, 2 at a time, away from the fire. For 6 hours they worked, but the damage was already done. By sunrise, the center of Lac-Mégantic was unrecognizable. Over 1,000 residents lost their homes. Another 1,000 were forced to evacuate, unable to breathe in the air thick with toxic fumes. 26,000 gallons of crude oil leaked into the Chaudière River and the lake. Emergency crews arrived from across Quebec and New England. They were met not with chaos, but with quiet. The hospital went into code orange, a mass casualty response. Beds were cleared, staff assembled, surgeons stood ready, but no patients ever came. 47 people had vanished. A few bodies were found almost whole, near the periphery. Others, just fragments. DNA, dental records, wedding rings, watches. That's how families would learn their loved one's fate. 5 were never found. This had become one of the deadliest rail disasters in Canadian history. Tom Harding, Jean Demate, and Richard Labrie were arrested and charged with 47 counts of criminal negligence causing death, one for every life lost. Harding, the train's lone engineer; Demate, the rail traffic controller; Labrie, the operations manager on duty. Harding was accused of applying too few handbrakes before leaving the train for the night, and of parking the convoy on a slope 10 kilometers above Lac-Mégantic. Labrie was said to have failed to properly check on the train after the fire. Demate was accused of failing to take the proper measures to ensure the train was secure. Together, they created a chain reaction. In 2017, 4 years after the blast, they stood trial in a Sherbrooke courtroom. Many people in Lac-Mégantic said they felt sympathy for the 3 men who were charged and put on trial. They believed the real blame belonged to the company. When the 3 first appeared in court in 2014, one father, Ghislain Champagne, who lost his daughter in the explosion, shouted as they walked in, "It's not them we want." The trial lasted over 3 months. Jurors heard from 31 witnesses, examined hundreds of exhibits. The defense argued something else: systemic failure, a company that cut corners. a government that looked away, a culture of deregulation. The jury deliberated for 9 days. Then they returned. All 3 were acquitted. During Canada's Transportation Safety Board technical investigation, they identified a chain of 18 contributing factors to the disaster, among them mechanical problems with the lead locomotive, insufficient use of handbrakes, a lax safety culture at train company MMA, and inadequate oversight by Transport Canada. The MMA filed for bankruptcy within weeks of the disaster. It had just $25 million in liability insurance. The damage in Lac-Mégantic was estimated at over $400 million. The company was later sold to Fortress Investment Group, which continued operations under a new name, Central Maine and Quebec Railway. The DOT 111 tank cars were later banned from carrying crude oil in Canada. But by then, it was too late for Lac-Mégantic. And the train tracks? They still cut through the town to this day. However, the Lac-Mégantic rail bypass is a 12.5-kilometer project designed to reroute train traffic away from the town's downtown core. As of early 2025, the project is progressing through regulatory and preparatory stages. The town of Lac-Mégantic was rebuilt, and the new Musée Café now stands in another part of town, smaller, quieter. Where the old one stood, there's a memorial with the names of the 47 people who tragically passed away, etched in stone.